1 Peter chapter 4 is where we're going to begin. 1 Peter chapter 4. I do hope that you are following along at home in the book. We're going to be kind of supplementing what we read there and helping us to kind of think through how we as Christians should minister to victims of abuse. In chapter 4, verse 10 of 1 Peter 4, verse 10. Hey, Nathan, can you close the back door? Thanks. As every man has received the gift, even so minister the same one to another, as good stewards of the manifold grace of God. If any man speak, let him speak as the oracles of God. If any man minister, let him do it as of the ability which God gives, that God, how we are to use those for the edification of the body of Christ. One of the things that's very important for us when we think about situations of abuse and ministering to victims is to remember that each one of us has a part to play and that we are called to love our neighbor as ourselves. Sometimes we view the situation of abuse as merely a legal matter, that a husband punches his wife and so we just call the police and he gets arrested for domestic violence and that's it. We wash our hands of it. Or a child gets molested, we call the police, he goes to jail, and that's it. However, the legal aspect of it is actually the smallest part of what the church is required to do. The church is, as the body of Christ, supposed to minister to the hurting and the broken and see them brought to wholeness. That is our job. So, yes, we will refer things to the police, but it doesn't matter what the police does. It does not matter what the end result is. It doesn't matter whether there are restraining orders or what the government chooses to do is the government's decision. We are left with the aftermath, the effects of that abuse. We are left with hurting children, hurting spouses, hurting people. And that's where the body of Christ is supposed to come in and love those who are victims to see them brought to wholeness. Lord willing, next week we'll talk about what you do with the offending party, with the sinner. But what we want to talk about today is how the body of Christ can minister to a victim. Several things to note, okay? One, again, the police aspect is a teeny little portion of what the church is required to do. But you may say, I am not a counselor, okay? That's good. We're not going to talk about counseling today. I'm not expecting you as a member of the church to end up taking on 5 counseling cases where you're sitting down and counseling 5 people who are victims of domestic violence, etc. The most important thing when it comes to the restoration of a victim is not the legal and is not the counselor. It is the way the body of Christ ministers holistically to the person. Okay? Something just as simple as being friendly, treating them as if they are normal, greeting them, acknowledging them, goes a tremendously long way. When people come to our church, we just see a visitor. What we do not see is everything behind that. There was I think it was a training video that Chick-fil-A had that I saw one time, and it was phenomenal because it was a walk through the restaurant, and it was a walk through the restaurant just like asking people, hey, can I get you anything? Do you need a refill? Do you need more sauces or whatever? And then it went back and did the same walkthrough, and there was a marquee over every person's head. Just got served divorce papers. Just found out they were diagnosed with cancer, celebrating their birthday. And so it changed the way you viewed the person who was snappy. It changed the way you viewed the person who was demanding. It changed the way you viewed the person who wanted to engage in conversation with you. When we have people, and then this is not necessarily just in church, we have new people that come into our lives, we have no idea what they are going through when we meet them. This is why we are commanded to love our neighbor as ourselves. This is where all of this is really just the Christian law of love. And so when someone comes and they just went through a domestic violence incident, and so they feel like they can't go back to their previous church, and so they're visiting a new church, and they show up to church, and people walk up to her and they treat her like normal, They don't look down at her or shun her or turn that goes a long way to their healing and recovery. So one of the most important things you can do in every aspect as a Christian is be friendly, loving, and welcoming to everyone you meet. There's going to be many people who come who are not victims of domestic violence. And what should we be? Welcoming, loving, friendly. There are going to be people who come who have zero abuse in their family. And what do they need to be? We need to be welcoming to them. We need to be loving to them. We need to make them feel welcome. This is very important because when people go through difficult times, one of the hardest things they have to deal with is the spiritual fallout. Where is God? Why did God let this happen? I was trying to be good, and God didn't protect me. And again, this is not necessarily the right way of thinking. This is just the thought process people have. And so because of this, there can be a timidity or even a rejection of the church, of God, etc., because God didn't protect me from so-and-so. I was in church and all of this hurt happened to me from someone within the church. And so there can be a fear of rejection from God, a rejection from the people of God. And remember that we as the body of Christ are showing to people a visible representation of who Jesus is. And that's why it's so important to reach out to visitors, to make them feel welcome. And again, this is not necessarily just because everybody's abusive. No, that's not what we're saying. Because even if they're just a first-time visitor, we want them to feel welcome. But it's especially important because you don't know the monikers that people put on themselves. Unloved, God hates me, nobody wants me. And there are people who will go to church sometimes feeling that way. And all it takes is someone in the church welcoming them. And so you say, well, I can't do counseling. I don't know enough about legal stuff. That's fine. Just love people. Now, a lot of this loving your neighbor is actually just taking time to think through what different scenarios people have been through. So, for example, most of the time, and this is not all the time, but most of the time when there is an instance of abuse, it is normally a male who has done that. Many times, not all the time, it would be someone who is the primary breadwinner. And one of the reasons people stay with abusive people and don't report them to police, etc., is because of the fallout if something was to happen to the breadwinner. If something happens to him, they may lose their home. If something happens to them, they may not be able to feed their kids. And in horribly abusive situations, many times the abuser knows this and holds it over their head. This is why it's very important to have a church with functioning deacon ministry and to have godly deacons' wives. This is why when you evaluate a deacon, one of the things you're supposed to look at is their spouse. So let's think this through for a minute, okay? There is a man who's beat the daylights out of his wife. Okay, she has called the police, he's been arrested. Okay, in that domestic violence, there's going to be a lot more of domestic disturbance than just the violence. There's going to be a lot of accusations, there's going to be a lot of hurt feelings, there's going to be a lot of lies, etc. Now, if he's incarcerated and the neighbor sees a deacon come up, and there's a man that gets out of the car and goes into the house, and that gets back to the guy, what do you think is going to happen? See, I told you she was cheating on me. She lied to me. Okay, those type of ideas can be there. That's why it's very important for there to be women in the church that are able to minister to her. But it's important to have a deacon ministry because if someone, through maybe the abuse of a child, there is someone who is then removed who's the primary breadwinner, okay, we need to have someone who is able to fix the car, someone who is able to do stuff around the house that she is unable to do so that she can start now doing everything to provide for her family. We want to see people rise out of those things, and then you can leave all of the intensive counseling, etc., to someone else. So you look at this and you say, well, I can't do much, but I know how to change a tire. Well, what happens to a lady who, in the midst of violence, do you ever think it might be possible that he would slash her tires to keep her from leaving? I had a friend of mine in high school. There's kids, so I'll be very careful. whose mom got a job because of the domestic violence issue so that she would be able to leave. And he then did things to make it where she would be unable to function at her new job, so that there was no way she could leave. And this is why it's important to have people in the church who are able to help someone fix things, other things as well. You may know of housing. One of the things that people are scared of when they come from those incidences is a restraining order is nothing more than a piece of paper. How do we know that he is not going to come and harm us? There is a lot of fear that victims have. So being able to house them in a place with someone that the abuser does not know where they live, okay? Being willing to do things that seem out of the ordinary to regular people, like a video camera, a lock on the bedroom door, locks on windows, those type of things to us, we would never think of, but being able to say, hey, I know how to change a doorknob, that can be very comforting to someone who's an abuse victim. And when we look at this from the church, we as Christians all have gifts and we all have talents, and we need to be willing to use those to help victims find healing. Connections, okay? Think of it this way. If a lady in our church husband died and didn't have life insurance, okay, and they were living paycheck to paycheck, how is she going to take care of her family? Well, she may have to go get a job. Well, when was the last time she actually applied for a job? When was the last time she actually even formed a resume? Okay, when was the last time she ever had any skills to work in the workplace or anything like that? What is going to happen with her kids? And this is where every single part of the body of Christ can come together. Someone can say, hey, I clean houses for a living. You can come and you can bring your kids and help. Or, hey, I need someone to watch my kids. I will pay you to watch my kids. Something that someone may ordinarily do to you as a favor, you may in turn enable them to work, asking them to come clean your house so that you can provide for them and you can help them to get back on their feet. You may know someone who is looking for someone to do secretarial work. You may know someone who needs somebody to do some work that they can do at home. These are the things that we as Christians have to do. And what I want you to see is that the abuse is normally not the total of the picture. Normally there's an incident or several incidences that affect someone. But the fallout of that then affects them for years, if not decades. Feelings of fear, lack of income, lack of safe housing, lack of job, etc., etc. And this is where every member of the body of Christ can play their part to help someone get back on their feet. Now, when you talk about, okay, we talked about last week about maybe a time of reconciliation. Okay, well, if there's going to be a time of reconciliation that is done correctly and done wisely, there is going to be where the period of reconciliation takes a long time. Because trust that has been broken so severely is going to take a while for that trust to be rebuilt. And this is part of where the body of Christ can be involved. For many reasons, a child or a spouse or even a parent may not be the best person to be supervising someone once they get out of jail, once they start that reconciliation process. Sometimes you need someone who is emotionally removed, someone who is objective, someone who understands where people are coming from, who says, you know what, I'm not a good counselor, but I don't mind spending time with this young man, spending time with you, being there when y'all have some interaction so that you feel safe and secure. There are many, many different ways that you as a member of the body of Christ can be involved. But this really boils down to, do you love someone enough to walk the valley with them, to listen to the pain that they are experiencing, to identify with them, and then to walk the long road of recovery. That's really what it comes down to. And each one of us has a part to play in that. Every single one of us. But if you've listened, what I just described is God's love for you. That God saw you and your pain and your suffering, your misery. Jesus came, humbled himself, gave up of his time, gave up of his life to walk with you for many, many years to bring you to wholeness. Okay? As we look at this, now I want to kind of trace a little rabbit trail and come back. As a whole, our church has fewer victims than society at large. Much fewer. That being said, we do have people in our church who are victims of abuse. In that regards, it is going to require every single one of us to bring even just one to wellness, to wholeness, to a right relationship with God. But that does not mean that you are going to be the one doing the bulk of the counseling, doing the bulk of those things. Again, just being a shoulder to cry on, being someone who's a listening ear, being someone who's willing to take care of the physical things. Those things are all important as we help someone down this road. Now, before we continue, any questions or comments on this? In helping, we as people are insatiably curious. Okay, and what I mean by that is sometimes we want to know more than we need to know. Sometimes we want to know why, names, instances, etc. This is where the church trusting one another helps us to work together. When it comes to situations of abuse, very few people want to stand in front of a church and disclose the deepest, darkest secrets of their life, even if they are 100% innocent in those things. So when a situation like this comes up, you may not be told everything that took place, and that's okay. As a Christian, we're to love hurting people, and we don't have to know all the reasons they're hurting. To use a different illustration, if someone, like Patrick was talking this morning about struggling with COVID, you know what? I'm not a doctor, so I'm not going to ask what medicines he's on. I'm not going to ask dosage, because quite honestly, I don't really know what I'm doing in that regards. But I can text him a Bible verse. I can say, I'm praying for you. I can ask, hey, does your family need meals? But even in that, I'm not a cook. So what I can do is then ask others in the church. And one of the things that I loved is when he was in the hospital, and we sent it out for people to bring meals, I didn't get a bunch of texts going, well, what medicine's he on? It doesn't matter. He's sick, he's hurting, we're going to help. So I want you to understand, when it comes to situations of abuse, sometimes we go, well, what actually happened? None of your business. They're hurting. You love them. That's it. Okay? Is there going to be a counselor that they're going to slowly over time disclose those things to? Absolutely. And you know what? As you minister to them, they may open up. In which case, you just listen. You say, well, what do I do if someone opens up to me? keep your mouth shut, listen, give them a hug, and say thank you for sharing, and don't share it with anyone else. That's it. One of the best things you could ever do is read the book of Job and read it from the perspective of what not to do. Job is suffering. He is hurting. And if you look at the beginning, and I appreciate this in the reading this week, they got it right. At the beginning, they just showed up and sat there. That's it. They just sat there. But then, when Job started to talk, they decided to play theologian and correct him and tell him how wrong he was on everything. The people that you are going to be ministering to have already been down the road of thinking it's their fault and thinking that God is punishing them. They've already been down that road. The parents are already asking, where did we go wrong? The children are already asking, is it my fault? The victim saying, what did I do? Why does God hate me? Why is God out to get me? And the last thing you want to be is an accuser of the brethren. The last thing you want to be is someone trying to play armchair quarterback and spouting off some of the worst stuff. Now, I'll be honest with you. Some of the hardest things for me to do in counseling is to undo what well-meaning people have said. And there's been times where I've spent hours counseling someone over something that some well-meaning Christian said that was not true, that was a distortion, that was said in ignorance, they were not aware of the whole situation, and they said something about God or about, what they needed to do, etc., etc. What you need to do with hurting people is what my father would call the ministry of presence. You minister to them by just being there for them. That's it. You call them, how you doing? And you listen. That's it. Okay? Are there going to be times when they end up spouting off a bunch of nonsense? Are there going to be times when they don't make any sense? Are there going to be times when they're angry with God, etc.? You know what? Listen. And if you're not their counselor, then call the person, call me, and say, hey, I'm praying for so-and-so. They shared these things with me. What do you think we should do? But if you try to jump in, all you're going to do is make things worse. And again, that's not saying that Christians shouldn't try to help. But if you look at the story of Job, Job just says, man, I wish y'all would have just kept your mouth shut. He said, if you were grieving, I would have helped you. I would have sustained you. I would have encouraged you. Understand, when people, even for me as a counselor, when people come and share situations of abuse with me, normally it takes a month of counseling before they ever open up about it. And then when they do, they share about 2% of what actually happened. How many of y'all think you can make an accurate assessment of what to do on 2% of information? You can't. And what you have to do when you're counseling somebody is you just have to listen and ask questions, and listen and ask questions, and listen and ask questions. And this is where, as just a regular church member that loves people, just listen. Ask, how can I pray for you? Is there something that I can do that makes you feel more comfortable at church? Is there a way that I can help you? And you know what? To be honest with you, many times the answer you're going to get is, I don't know. You know why? Because they don't. Most of you have planned on what's going to happen when you get your first grandkid or when your child walks down the aisle. You have your plan for when your child turns 13, how you're going to teach your child to drive. You have all of these plans. You don't have plans for what you're going to do when this takes place in your home. You don't. So when people are hurting, just weep with them. Just be there. And one of the things is when they do disclose things to you, One of the most important things you can do is show back up again. Even if you were only planning on being there once, even if you just went over there to fix their sink, and while they're there, they start pouring out their heart, okay? You need to respond the next time you see them. You need to go up and talk to them the next time they're at church, because you know what happens if you don't? They interpret that as rejection. They interpret that as, if I disclose what took place to me in the slightest bit, nobody will talk to me anymore. If I was to tell them everything that took place, no one would be my friend. This is very, very, very important. And this is where the whole body of Christ comes together. Because people who've been through these things are going to be scared. They're going to be scared of the police. They're going to be scared of neighbors. They're going to be scared of a car that looks just like that car. Okay? They're going to be scared of certain places, certain things. And what we want to be is we want to be the ones who are there for them, who understand, who listen, who don't judge. Listen, if someone is blatantly sinning, yes, we should confront them. But if somebody is angry, who has been through these things, they have a right to be angry. It's called righteous anger. And jumping down their throat because why aren't you more kind and gracious is not helpful. Be there for them. Okay, something as simple as making a meal for them, shooting them a text, saying, what do I say? Just say, I'm praying for you. You don't have to have answers. That's some of the most important things you can do. So if there ever is a time or someone discloses to you, hey, this is what happened to me in my childhood, just continue to be there for them. Continue to love them. Don't treat them differently. Don't look at them differently. Okay? Make sure that you go out of your way to make them feel welcome. Okay? In all of this is daunting and as overwhelming as it may seem to minister to someone who's been abused. It really, I'm going to be very careful how I say this, it really is very easy if you just love people. That's it. If you just want to listen, and you want to help, and you want to encourage, that's really it. You're not there to solve the problem. You're not there to fix everything. The problem is something only Jesus Christ can fix. You are just supposed to be the arms of the body of Christ that loves them. Okay? Any questions or comments?